Donald Trump isn't just promising a return to power, he's threatening to dismantle the last guardrails of American democracy.
President Trump's immigration crackdown is intensifying. The White House says it's considering suspending habeas corpus, the constitutional right allowing people to challenge their detention in court.
President Trump ordered the Department of Homeland Security late Friday to add 20,000 officers to the deportation forces of the U.S.
And these comments come amid attacks on other constitutional rights. Trump trying to ban birthright citizenship and making comments about serving a possible third term. Something that the Constitution says is not possible, by the way.
The Trump administration is considering suspending immigrants' a right to challenge their detention in court before being deported. White House Deputy Chief of Staff Stephen Miller spoke to reporters about the idea.
The Constitution is clear, and that, of course, is the supreme law of the land, that the privilege of the writ of habeas corpus can be suspended in a time of invasion. Look, a lot of it depends on whether the courts do the right thing or not.
Such a move would be a dramatic escalation of Trump's immigration crackdown as the writ of habeas corpus is enshrined in the U.S. Constitution.
If migrants are viewed as a kind of invasion, maybe we don't need judges poking around anymore. Really. Let that sink in. In a country that ostensibly prides itself on due process, they're dusting off the clause that says habeas can only be suspended in cases of rebellion or invasion, historically invoked only 4 times Lincoln's Civil War. Grants Reconstruction, World War I, Philippines, World War II, Hawaii, and trying to apply it to mass deportations. Imagine it thousands of people shipped out without a chance to even set foot in a court. It's the kind of move we associate with banana republics or late-night Netflix thrillers about coups not a proud American administration. And yet Miller is dead serious. The Constitution is clear he sniffed as if quoting it made this okay. Spoiler, it actually says the opposite. By default, we get due process, except when specific national emergencies justify an exception. An invasion is a military affair, not one of migration. That line isn't my snark. It's Judge Karen Henderson, a Reagan appointee, shredding the Trump team's argument alongside Judge Stephanie Gallagher, yes, a Trump pick. In a withering opinion, they noted the administration produced no evidence that unaccompanied teenagers seeking asylum pose a threat to public safety. Even conservative jurists can spot a scarecrow when it lurches across their courtroom. Yet the crooked logic persists. Label migration and invasion invoke emergency war powers and bypass the courts. Stephen Miller actually framed families with suitcases as soldiers, with rifles insisting the Constitution's suspension clause suddenly applies. Federal judges torch that fantasy in minutes. Henderson repeated an invasion is a military affair, not one of migration, and colleagues from both parties agreed. They laughed at the claim that Tren de Aragua, a Venezuelan gang dispersed across continents, qualifies as a hostile army storming El Paso. Translation calling brown people crossing the desert invaders doesn't make it legally true, it just spotlights the overt racism. When your best evidence is fear itself, the bench treats your brief like a midnight ghost story, entertaining but dismissed. Democracy survives by rejecting cartoon villains masquerading as statesmen.
So Laura, can the president do this, as Miller is suggesting?
So habeas is the most basic entitlement to judicial review of unlawful detention, as you noted, Jeff. And essentially, I spoke to Steve Vladeck, the constitutional law scholar, who said that habeas is so fundamental that it is a right that is in the original Constitution under Article 1, and that the overwhelming consensus is that it's long been that only Congress can suspend habeas corpus. The only other time that a president has essentially done this is when it appears as though Congress is not in session. President Lincoln did this when Congress was not in session at the beginning of the Civil War, but then Congress later authorized the ability to suspend habeas. Another constitutional law expert I spoke to said that this is significant because without habeas, there's no way for a person to go before a court and to essentially argue that their liberty was taken away and have a hearing to argue that. Now, the timing of Stephen Miller's comments is key here because of the fact that it's after judges have repeatedly ruled that the administration's actions regarding deportations are unlawful, and it also comes after a student just today was ordered released by a federal judge from detention after filing a successful habeas petition.
And yet here we are with senior advisor Miller telling us that if courts don't go along, the answer is to yank away habeas. It's a play out of the authoritarian handbook, declare a crisis, even a fake one, then argue due process is a luxury. As Georgetown law professor Steve Vladeck dryly observed, Miller is being slippery about the actual text of the Constitution. The suspension clause doesn't say any invasion, it explicitly requires cases of invasion or rebellion that threaten public safety. That means we're supposed to have a national emergency, like a full-scale attack. Even loading a bus with migrants and calling it a battalion doesn't meet that bar. Vladeck quipped that releasing a teenage asylum seeker like Rumeysa Öztürk poses no threat to public safety, which last time we checked sounds about right. Put bluntly, we're watching officials revel in playing fast and loose with the law. First came the war on immigrants strategy, arbitrary sweeps, kangaroo court denials of asylum, all the usual ugliness. Then the AEA Alien Enemies Act, dusted off for kids. Now the big guns suspend habeas, skip the courts, lock people up indefinitely. It's a horror show legal menu. Every step rings alarm bells in this democracy-loving heart. If this was a TV series, it'd be that season where the villains break the library instead of burning books. Seriously, remember The Handmaid's Tale? Or 1984? Because when the government removes the right to challenge detention, we're staring into the abyss that those stories warned about. Suspending habeas corpus is not a casual idea on the table. It has only happened 4 times in 250 years, and each time Congress was involved and society was at war. Today's Congress is split and gridlocked. The AP notes it's nearly impossible to even pretend Congress would authorize this. So why are we even talking about it? Because it sounds scary, and Trump and company love using fear as their wedge. Any guesses on what else might count as a future invasion? A human caravan of climate refugees? My dog wandering off leash? In any sane world, this idea would have sunk within hours, but instead, multiple news outlets, The Guardian, AP, BBC, Yahoo, and more are all covering it like it's serious business. Because it is. It's like watching someone film themselves pouring gasoline on the rule of law and striking a match for ratings. And what happens if judges don't do the right thing as Miller demands? We've already seen a preview several federal courts have thrown down against this gambit. Not only did they block the removal of people under the spurious invasion claim, but they're pointing out how absurd the administration's arguments are. One trial court judge noted that the government didn't even bother gathering evidence against the kids in custody, just grand declarations about security threats that never materialize. In other words, the courts are refusing to be magic erasers of the Constitution. And of course, Trump has responded with the usual screeching about so-called judges and hinting that maybe they're traitors. Again, it's enough to make your head spin, or it should. But hang on, we're not done. Trump's flip side of the power grab involves birthright citizenship, another sacred constitutional guarantee. We've seen this circus before, but this time it's coming with a side of Supreme Court fireworks. On day 1 of his return, Trump signed an executive order because, of course, trying to end automatic citizenship for American-born kids of undocumented parents. Think about that literally undoing the 14th Amendment by fiat. Remarkably, that's technically outside normal procedure. Laws aren't superseded by orders. He actually directed officials to refuse to recognize citizenship if neither parent is a citizen or green card holder. So yes, baby Juan, born in Queens, could be labeled foreigner by the state. It's the clearest bait and switch attempt to rewrite the Constitution. Predictably, 3 federal judges quickly slapped that down with nationwide injunctions, which means Trump's birthright EO was on hold across the country while the courts consider the fight. Cue the meltdown. Trump and his aides lost their mind over these injunctions. In public posts, he even accused Chief Justice Roberts of stabbing me in the back by not handing him a rubber stamp majority to kill the injunctions. Roberts responded by basically telling him to grow up and file an appeal. But whatever. Then in late March, the administration quietly petitioned the Supreme Court to intervene in the case not on the merits of birthright, but to curtail nationwide injunctions themselves. To hear Trump tell it on Twitter, stop nationwide injunctions now before it's too late. If the Supreme Court does not fix this toxic and unprecedented situation immediately, our country is in very serious trouble. Did anyone else expect a Gadsden flag emoji in that tweet? No wonder Trump is trying to paint this fight as a high-minded principle. He's even suggested Congress should pass a law making all injunctions local or something, because why not involve the seat of dysfunction? Meanwhile, courts handling other Trump policies, deportation flights, asylum rules, environmental regs are also piling up nationwide orders. Over 100 cases, in fact, some completely unrelated to immigration, have been put on hold countrywide. To the Trumpites, that's judicial activism run amok. But to the rest of us, those injunctions are the last line of defense when a policy is overreaching or unlawful. President Biden himself faced nationwide injunctions blocking his student loan forgiveness and COVID mandates. Remember those? And sometimes complained too, but even he didn't go as far as to broadcast his tirades on Mastodon or whatever. Trump's response was far worse, venting in all caps online, calling judges names, and now dragging the Supreme Court into rewriting remedies. Think about the implications. If Trump succeeds in convincing the court to gut nationwide injunctions, it's not just about birthright. All citizens could find themselves living under driftwood laws. Something strikes down a new ban. No automatic wave of relief for everyone, just the few plaintiffs. It's like saying women's rights can vary by state, or civil liberties are local. Courts across the political spectrum agree that uniform standards are crucial. Even in 2021, when conservative judges wrote against far-left groups, they usually still preserved one ruling for the whole country when dealing with federal policy. Here, apparently, they're supposed to balkanize Americans. Some chosen ones get their birthright, others don't. That'd be a trademark change of guardrails. No wonder Selman and others are sounding the alarm. Citizenship rules are supposed to be uniform, he reminds us, and it's no coincidence he titled his statement, "If ever a nationwide injunction is justified, it is here." That came from a May 8th Cato news release, by the way. Alan Morrison, a respected GW law dean, pointed out that Trump's lawyers are now arguing as if the real issue is the injunctions, not the constitutionality of the order. It's sleight of hand if the court can avoid saying, "Good Lord, you can't do that," and instead say, "Fine, stay for plaintiffs, only Trump gets a partial victory." In other words, the urgent questions of the 14th Amendment and the founding principles are getting sidestepped. That's why it's insane that the White House spun this into a judicial power crisis, rather than admitting what they want to rewrite the Constitution at will. The common thread here is obvious. Trump has spent the last few weeks scrapping whatever checks remain. Habeas corpus, seen as an obstacle to deportations, is suddenly suspendable if he says so. Birthright citizenship, enshrined in the 14th Amendment since 1868, is now declared obsolete via executive fiat. Nationwide injunctions, a decades-old tool of the federal judiciary, are toxic and must be stopped. Every defensive bulwark around individual rights is under attack. Picture a Jenga tower labeled democracy. He's yanking blocks with one hand and telling us the tower was shaky anyway. And in case it wasn't already clear, it's all deeply racist and exclusionary theater. The targets are people of color at every turn, immigrants, kids with non-white faces, dissenters CF, Palestinian students being deported for pro-Palestine tweets. Migrants are grotesquely cast as invaders, while actual white-collar criminals on Wall Street see no such treatment. Birthright citizenship guaranteed to everyone born here, regardless of race, is suddenly a villain when brown women have kids. It's the same old scapegoating blame and other population for abstract problems. Low wages, crime elections lost, and use fear-mongering to crush constitutional norms. Pop quiz. When did a busload of asylum seekers become a national security threat that justifies shredding the Constitution? The outrage meter should be off the charts right now. This isn't a routine policy debate, it's a full-on authoritarian power play. This is the kind of thing people warned about when they said, "Stop normalizing Trump." Back in the day, conservatives attacked Trump for Charlottesville, the Muslim-banned Trump University, and he barely squeaked into office. Now he's announcing suspension of habeas on TV, admitting his plan to violate a constitutional amendment, and asking the Supreme Court to be his personal do-over. If we shrug at this, we may as well swap democracy for something called Trumpism 1.0 and hope for the best. Seriously, it's not hyperbole to say the next few weeks could decide whether this crisis escalates or fizzles. If the Supreme Court eventually sidelines all these nationwide injunctions, we will still exist, but for a while, you could have different laws in different states, and we'll find out which states have real courts, eh? If judges allow habeas to be suspended even a little, then any administration in future could lock people up at will. Some pundits point out that even if the court says no, Trump, you can't do these things, the political damage is done, precedent of talking about doing it, court-packing fantasies, etc. At bottom, folks, this isn't just one scandalous headline. This is a systematic attack on our system. Nationally, we're sliding on a greasy slope toward big-off authoritarianism, hiding behind patriotic words. The constitutional guardrails are the main thing separating a free country from fascism, and one man is trying to remove them one by tweet and by executive order. History books may well look back and mark this moment as a point where all the alarms started blaring, if there are any books left to write in 20 years. So long story short, here's the bottom line in Trumpian math. Habeas corpus plus birthright citizenship plus nationwide injunctions equals the last three fingers on the liberty hand. Take anyone away and the hand can still see a doctor. Take away all three, you're basically waving a white flag in the face of tyranny. We're not doing that. This isn't just a scandal, it's a system failure, and it's up to all of us to fix it while we still can.